Everybody else set? No, you guys are always like, we've been here. All right, well, good morning, everybody. San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria, here for my regularly monthly media briefing. Thank you for joining us. I want to start by providing some updates on our city's efforts to address homelessness, which is without question the top priority in my administration, as well as preview some of the upcoming issues that we anticipate having for you all and the public later this month. With me this morning to provide some additional insight and help answer any questions you may have, City Council Member Stephen Whitburn from Council District 3, Chief of Police David Nisley, as well as Captain Sean Takeuchi, who oversees the department's neighborhood policing division. We also have Hasla Keika, who is our director of the city's homelessness strategies and solutions department, Renee Robertson, the director of the city's environmental services department, and Elise Seaton, the deputy director of the city's engineering and capital projects department. Appreciate all of these public servants for being here with me this morning. So let me begin by reiterating that solving homelessness is our city's top priority. We're not going to be a city that is content with leaving people to live on our streets, our sidewalks, in our riverbeds, in our canyons. Doing so is far less compassionate than the dangers that they face and their unsanitary conditions that pervade and the challenges that it presents to the overall public health and safety of San Diego. This is the issue that I hear the most about from residents. Last week alone, the city received 1,200 reports from residents about homeless encampments submitted through our Get It Done app. My staff can provide you with additional details. This number is going up over time. I also want to say that it is the #1 issue that I hear about from other mayors across this country. I spent this past weekend at the U.S. Conference of Mayors annual meeting in cities as diverse as Seattle, Oklahoma City, Rockford, Illinois, large cities and small, in the interior and on the coast, red states and blue states. All of us are seeing the exact same challenges of growing encampments throughout our cities. As I've said before, and as we can all see on our streets, homelessness is the most complex problem that we face, and there are no easy nor quick solutions. But that does not mean that there is no solution. We know that people who seem like the hardest of cases can completely turn their lives around when they're given housing with services. And that's what we're building towards. We're building towards a lot more housing with services. In the meantime, though, we cannot allow folks to live on our streets, leave them there where the conditions are unsanitary and the situation is only getting worse. We have an obligation as a city to get folks off the streets, connected to services, and on a path to permanent housing. And therein is our plan to address homelessness: outreach, shelter, permanent supportive housing. I'll tell you some more about that. We reach people experiencing homelessness right where they're at, using our coordinated street outreach teams to offer a chance to each of these individuals to come off the streets and get into a shelter bed. Now, being in a shelter means that folks are safer. They also have access to services that they need and connections to housing that will permanently end their homelessness. Services like job training, like mental health therapy, like drug rehab, the kinds of stuff that can address the underlying and root causes that have driven them to our sidewalks. As it stands right now, our shelter system is regularly at over 93% occupancy, keeping approximately 1,200 people from having to sleep on our streets and sidewalks every single night. Again, 1,200 people every single night. Last month at this briefing, I updated you on our plans to add 450 additional beds to our shelter system by the end of the year, and we are making good on those efforts. We just opened an interim shelter on Palm Avenue down in South Bay. We have 20 people there right now with room for more. One of the clients, a 70-year-old veteran of our armed services, has already made a successful transition out of that shelter and into permanent housing. Last Monday, I stood with County Board of Supervisors Chair Nathan Fletcher, along with Supervisor Tara Lawson-Remer and Council Member Jennifer Campbell, as well as the Lucky Duck Foundation, as we began construction on a new shelter in the Midway community. We expect that work to be completed and have it operational by July. That's another 125 to 150 people who will have the opportunity to get off the street. We're also heeding what we're hearing from folks who are resisting coming off the streets and working to diversify and expand our temporary shelter programs to meet the needs of our unsheltered population. We have and we are growing our offerings for families, medically fragile seniors, for women, for those with mental health challenges and substance use disorder, and individuals living in their cars who have a sanctioned place to live in vehicles, as well as access to services at our safe parking lots. Later this month, I'll be joining Catholic Charities for the opening of a shelter for medically fragile women in downtown. And the point here is that we are investing an unprecedented amount of funds and staff resources to bring beds online quickly, creating suitable alternatives to living on the streets. We have deployed tens of millions of dollars of local, state, and federal funds over the past 18 months to get folks into a position to end their homelessness, and we expect unsheltered folks to play a part in this as well. Camping on the sidewalk should not be an option when alternatives exist, because people living on the streets and sidewalks is not without impacts on the neighborhoods where it is happening. And those impacts are growing, and they're far more serious and consequential than ever. Right now, in neighborhoods across this city, we have entire sidewalks on both sides of the streets taken over by encampments, creating public health and safety hazards, hurting local businesses, and eroding our quality of life. These encampments are forcing school children to walk in the middle of the street to get around encampments as they go on their way to get their education. They add to the burden of mobility-challenged San Diegans who need the use of the sidewalk to get where they need to go. And they create health hazards. Health hazards with materials that are accumulating on the streets, some of which you see in the photos behind me. That's why, as many of you reported this past week, we are enforcing our laws forbidding encroachment on the public right-of-way. Now, to be clear, every enforcement operation follows days, if not weeks, of outreach teams repeatedly offering assistance and shelter and painstakingly trying to get folks to accept help. And for those who choose to remain, often enforcement is the option that we're left with. I cannot let folks take advantage of San Diegans' deep will of compassion for this issue and wave away the help that they're offered and the services that we're providing because sometimes they're more comfortable on the streets and don't want to take action to change their situation. That's not okay. It's not okay. And we will continue to do what we can as compassionately as possible to help these individuals without simply allowing them to live and camp on our sidewalks, our streets. I want to speak to those individuals who are unsheltered. My ask is very simple. Please accept the help that you're offered. I can't imagine what caused you to end up on the streets. Bad luck, divorce, job loss, generational trauma, the list goes on. Complex, difficult. What I know for sure is there's a better life for you. And we will do everything that we can to get you into that position. We're doing that now. And I ask you to please connect with the housing and the services that are out there. We have shelter beds available right now with low barriers to access. You can bring your belongings, your pets, your significant other. You don't have to be sober. We will take you just as you are and get you the help and support that you need and that you deserve and put you on a path towards permanent housing. If you're living in your vehicle, we have safe parking lots where you can go overnight for a safe place with restrooms and with services, including resources that can get you out of your car and into homes. We've placed people from the street living in their cars into housing, just as we've done as folks leaving our shelters. Talk to an outreach worker, call 211 to get connected to help. You can also call or walk into our Homelessness Response Center at 1401 Imperial Avenue in the East Village. There is help available. I ask you to please use it. For a couple more comments on this subject is Councilmember Whitburn, and I'll come back and share a couple more subjects. Councilmember?
Thank you very much, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Whitburn. I represent downtown and the neighborhoods around Balboa Park. Like the mayor, the number one issue that my constituents call me about by far is concern about encampments. The mayor mentioned the children walking to school who have to walk out into the street to get around the encampments, and the people who use wheelchairs who can't get by because there are encampments blocking the sidewalks. All San Diegans should be able to use the sidewalks for their intended purpose. And the encampments are unsafe for the people who live in them. They face death, like the 3 people who were killed when a car went on the sidewalk and hit an encampment near City College last year, or like the dozens who overdose as drug dealers prey upon their addictions. They face violence. Just last Friday, a man was stabbed in the chest at an encampment in Ocean Beach. They face disease. We had a Shigella outbreak late last year. A few years ago, we had an outbreak of hepatitis. We cannot allow the continuation of death, violence, and disease on our city's pedestrian walkways. We must end sidewalk camping in our city. I stand with the mayor, and today I call on all San Diegans to support this goal. I want to thank the mayor for the hundreds of new shelter beds being added this summer, shelters that serve a variety of different populations to meet their particular needs. I want San Diego to start a safe camping program where someone camping on a sidewalk can instead camp in a designated area with security and restrooms. The Downtown San Diego Partnership has been working on this, and I just returned from Denver where safe camping is working well, helping people off the sidewalks and into a safer space. We will offer people more options for shelter to meet their needs. But if they still refuse it, then we need to enforce the rules that prohibit sidewalk camping. We have an obligation to clear and to clean our public walkways and ensure that our sidewalks are free of encampments. This is a major undertaking, and it won't happen overnight. But we can do this because the mayor and the city council have been laying the necessary groundwork for people to come off our streets, increasing outreach and adding shelter beds, expanding mental health services, and building affordable housing. I want to again thank the mayor and his administration, including our Homeless Strategies and Solutions Department, our police department and its neighborhood policing division, our environmental services department, our engineering and capital projects department, and the many other partners in this effort. Most of all, I want to thank San Diegans for supporting our city and a city that is free of encampments on our sidewalks. Together, we will rise to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate your partnership on this issue. Councilmember Whitburn spends an extraordinary amount of time working on this issue, and a lot of the progress we've made is because of his leadership. I want to conclude with maybe just a couple of teasers, if you will, for what's going to come in the month ahead. Hopefully help you plan your schedule of what we may be doing over the month of June together. And then, of course, answer any questions you may have on the issue of homeless encampments or any of the other things that may be on your minds. This is going to be a big month for many of our major initiatives when the City Council returns from their spring recess. On June 13th, I'm looking forward to the City Council's consideration and their possible adoption of my Ready to Rebuild city budget for our next fiscal year. The budget is the largest investment in infrastructure in our city's history. The budget also includes full funding for our police department and our public safety departments. As I mentioned, close to $70 million from our city's general fund to continue addressing homelessness in San Diego. That's on top of the tens of millions that the San Diego Housing Commission will be appropriating for homelessness. It also makes good on our commitment to implement our bold climate action plan. I want to thank City Council President Sean Elo Rivera, as well as our Budget Committee Chair Chris Kate, for a well-run, robust, and constructive budget review process, and I look forward to the discussion on June 13th. Also this month, I'll be asking the City Council to take a final vote on the city's privacy ordinance, which will allow us to deploy systems that improve public safety and inform how we deploy our services. This ordinance ensures the public is informed about technology and monitoring systems that we have in place and gives them an opportunity to weigh in on the policies governing these systems. I look forward to that adoption and then working on additional tools to provide to the city, specifically to law enforcement, to make sure that we're keeping our neighborhoods safe. And later this week, we'll be announcing the city's Employ and Empower Youth Employment Program, which will use state funding to employ up to 1,000 local young San Diegans who may be interested in a career in public service. This is a part of my commitment as mayor to ensure that the city of San Diego is investing in our young people in this city. And so I'm excited to make this announcement later this week, specifically on Friday, with a number of our state leaders who will be here on hand for that announcement. And finally, we anticipate that the City Council will vote on the implementation of Measure B this summer and to put into place the Independent Commission on Police Practices, which is fully funded in the budget that we have proposed. Before I open up, we've heard from Councilmember Whitburn. Again, all of these individuals are here to answer any questions you may have. Happy to throw it open to anyone who may have questions.
Okay, I'll start.
All right.
Mayor, what is, for lack of a better way of putting it, what is the end game to the progressive enforcement policy on the encroachment ordinance? Because obviously, the communication isn't working. People aren't going to be, able to pay for the tickets that they're issued. They're going to be eventually arrested if they make it to that level. This isn't working. Where do we go from here?
So I might ask Captain Todd Gloria, who works on this daily, because we may have more specific information about that. But what I would say, Artie, is that obviously the end game is to house as many of these individuals as we possibly can. But we cannot allow our streets to deteriorate while we do that work. In the last year, my administration has increased shelter bed capacity in the city by 25%. We've got 450 more beds coming online later this year. We're going to continue to work in this direction of making sure that we have housing and services to offer to these individuals. But it has to be balanced, and it's always a balance with some accountability and enforcement of existing laws. We're a civil society. We've agreed to a certain set of rules to live by. There have to be consequences when individuals choose to ignore those laws. We don't like to do this. We provide advance notice. We follow all the applicable court rulings and legal settlements around cleanups. Individuals are notified. They're asked to move their materials. We can come through. They're welcome to go about their day after we've completed our work there. But sometimes, folks are not willing to respond to that. And there has to be some ability for Renee's folks and environmental services to provide the cleanup, the collection of massive amounts of materials that are down there to address the sanitary conditions. Councilmember Whitburn mentioned the various outbreaks we've seen there. End game is to not have that happen, right? We can't have additional outbreaks of that kind. So ultimately, we want to house folks. We don't want people living unsheltered in our community, but we have to have some ability to make sure that while we're doing that work, that we can maintain public health and safety on our streets.
And that point is understood, Mayor. And I know there are people that don't like the optics of what's happening down there. But again, as you do this, and I was just out there, half hour before we came here, the problem just appears to be getting worse. So what are the consequences? Obviously what we have left over are people who, most of them don't want shelter, it would appear. You have 200 or 2,000 shelter beds available, but there's, the point in time count showed 8,000. So, I guess, where do we go from here? Because nothing seems to be working and the problem keeps getting worse. And I understand what you're trying to do, but we can see it with our own eyes.
Sure. A couple of things in terms of level setting. The pit count was 8,000 people in the county. The 2,000 or so
4,000
beds are within the city of San Diego, right? And so in terms of the dynamic, we have work to do, no question. But no, it's just making sure,
Right.
the
The number is 4,000 in the city, though, correct?
a little north of that, but thereabouts, yes.
Right. So there's still that.
Unquestionably, but again, I spend an extraordinary amount of my time dispelling myths about this issue. And Lisa's done some exceptional reporting in that regard. When we're busy arguing whether or not these people are San Diegans or not, whether it's our weather or not, we spend time talking about that, not on solutions. So that is hence why I just want to make that thing, no problem on that already. In terms of, why is it getting worse? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's gotten worse. I think that the pandemic has been no friend to any of us, least of whom is our homeless population. When you have 2 years of, social distancing in shelters where hundreds of beds are not available to us, it didn't help. When our legal system, particularly our ability to book folks who are actively engaging in criminal activity into jail, or to the extent that we didn't have bail until just a few weeks ago, the consequences for the behavior, and I'm not suggesting that all homeless people are criminals, that is not true. But for those who are out there who are engaging in the behavior that often is most disturbing to San Diegans, to not have consequences definitely allows that problem to grow. So I think there are some things about the pandemic that have really exacerbated this issue, and helping to explain that to San Diegans is important. I think the other thing going on here is the rent's too damn high, right? Rents are going up through the roof, and I think there are some question about, how high do we want to go in order to exacerbate this problem? Because a lot of these folks don't have a mental illness, they don't have a substance use issue, they're simply poor. We were together with a senior citizen couple not long ago, that was exactly their issue. And so that's why you see my administration, we haven't talked about our pro-housing strategies that we're advancing to advance a lot more housing. Some of you all report about some of these projects that are getting built and folks who are upset about it. Ask them what they think about our homelessness crisis. Yeah, we have to build more housing in your neighborhood. That's what we got to do. So we're trying to address this comprehensively, but the end game, no one's happy to have to do this. But I think it's not unreasonable to inform someone days in advance that we will be there on site and that we need you to move out of the area temporarily so that we can make sure that you're not living in a condition that will cause you to acquire a communicable disease and potentially die. That's not too much to ask. Not too much to ask for.
Mayor, if I could follow up on Art Castañeda from La Prensa. I was down there the other day and I saw Artie there. I've been there 3 days in a row. We were there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I have a picture of a young woman named Brandy. And I was there with the officers. They cited her on Thursday for an encroachment violation. Actually, one of your sergeants, Chief, I'm glad you're here, was very disrespectful. The attitude of the police officers was very aggressive, even towards me. Your sergeant asked me why I don't start cleaning up the streets. I said, I'm watching what's going on. He said, why don't you do some good? They ticketed this young girl in her 20s. The next morning I was there, they threw away her tent and her clothes. while she was standing right there. They didn't give a 3-hour notice. They didn't tell her we're gonna come back tomorrow, kick her out. So what do you think is gonna happen with somebody when they throw away the only shelter they have? And I was there the rest of the day, and nobody cleaned up that sidewalk. They didn't come by and spray it down like they usually do. They simply punished her for being there again the second day, and they threw it away. Now, an advocate gave her a tent on Saturday morning. She's still on the street. She doesn't want to go to a shelter. So this, what I hear today, sounds like an escalation of your enforcement. This is probably the most clear articulation we've ever heard, that you're going to systematically go after people that are on the sidewalks. If they don't want to go to shelters, where do you expect that they're going to go? They're just going to move to another block and move out of your district into another district? It doesn't seem to be, as Artie has said, what's the end game? It just seems to be punitive at this point.
So I'm not familiar with Brandy. Did she explain why she doesn't want to go to a shelter?
She said nobody had contacted her in the day leading up to it. Nobody contacted her after she got the encroachment ticket. And she now has a lawyer. She's going to fight the ticket. So you go through that process. She doesn't even have money to pay for it. But they threw away her belongings that are the only shelter she has. So they didn't go and clean up the trash around her and say, can you move across the street? Your last comment was, we asked her to move temporarily. They threw away her stuff. So I've seen it with my own eyes. I know Artie was there. We were there together. It just seems to be punitive at this point, where you're either going to take them to jail or throw away their stuff so they have no other option but to go to a shelter. And if that's the plan, I think you kind of articulated today without connecting the dots. Is that what you're saying today? That the new enforcement is throw away your stuff so you have to go to a shelter?
We're enforcing our city's laws. With regard, I'm not sure what barrier there is to Brandy's desire to enter a shelter. If it's that she has a pet, we've asked our shelters to allow pets. If she has a spouse or a partner we've asked them to admit those folks. If she's in active substance use, we've lowered that barrier too. We've tried to remove every excuse that there is for accessing these services. I recognize for some folks they don't want to do it. The question is, for San Diegans, do we want to have our sidewalks serve as housing? The answer is no.
So that's the answer, though. So what you're saying is today the announcement is stricter enforcement until they go away.
So there's always been some level of enforcement through all this, but we haven't always been able to do everything because we haven't necessarily had the shelter capacity or places to offer folks. As we've made major investments of taxpayer dollars in making sure that there are offerings for these individuals, that has to come with some ability to ask them to use them. If they don't want to use them, it's a free country, I understand that, but it's not without consequences. I would ask these individuals to please avail themselves of what we're providing. We've turned Golden Hall into a 500+ bed homeless shelter. We're working right now to figure out how to convert the old Central Library into a shelter. We're working with our Economic Development Department to build over 600 units of permanent supportive housing in the next number of months. We're doing everything we can to provide people with better choices than the street. If we're going to redefine what is acceptable in terms of our society to include sheltering on the streets as acceptable, I won't be that guy. I'm not signing up for that. I don't think you are either. But when we provide those options for folks, they need to take them.
Good.
All right, folks.
Thank you.
Yes, Shannon.
In recent weeks during these cleanups, has it ever gone beyond ticketing? I know it starts with conversing with these people over and over and over, and then maybe giving them a ticket, but has anyone actually been arrested?
Did you want to handle that?
Yeah.
So before Shannon can answer your question, Art, I want to answer your question. So the direction I've given my officers is throughout the progressive enforcement posture, we are not throwing away tents. There's a very good likelihood what you saw, because I did hear these types of complaints. What you more than likely saw is an individual telling us that they did not want their property back.
Captain, I was there. That's not what happened.
Well,
she was begging them while she was taking her clothes out of the tent.
I'm going to give you
They
the
stripped
direction.
it from her.
I can tell you the direction I've given.
I understand. There's a miscommunication then with your officers.
And so I will look into that. So I will look into Brandy and the contact that was made with my officers with Brandy. That happened last Thursday or Friday.
Yes.
That's something I can look at. However, I want everyone else to know that the direction that's been given is, if the person is not going to jail, we are not taking their tents. We are not confiscating anything. If an individual is at that fourth state of progressive enforcement and we are making a custodial arrest, like Shannon just mentioned, then yes, we are asking the person to identify all of their personal belongings, and we are taking custody of that per our policy and procedure, and we are impounding that at our police facility. Anything else that the person does not claim or says that they don't want, then with the assistance of Environmental Services Division, we are disposing of that property. In many cases, we do have property that's tainted, soiled, that we can't impound. for the health and safety of the officers and the workers that work for the police department. And to answer your question, yes, last week, there were 3 individuals that were placed under arrest and booked into county jail for encroachment, which means that they've reached that 4th phase of progressive enforcement. They received a warning, an infraction citation, misdemeanor citation, and unfortunately, they're continuing to violate the law.
But how long are they in jail for?
That would be up to the sheriff's department. I can just tell you that my officers book people into county jail, and we rely on the sheriff's department to take the appropriate steps to either keep them in custody for, until arraignment or release them in many cases.
Captain, can you provide any numbers on the number of citations that you issued last year? And what is the time frame for the 3 arrests and the citation?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number of citations, but the steps are obviously a contact, verbal warning, and with each contact, we are offering shelter and services. We are educating people about the Storage Connect centers. So the first contact is a verbal warning, the second contact is an infraction, the third is a misdemeanor citation, and the 4th and subsequent contact can be custodial arrest, which is a physical arrest and booking into jail. Last week, we contacted over 200 folks. 4 people accepted shelter, which is great. 1 person accepted a referral to a storage center, which we were able to provide. More than 20 of we made a total of 25 arrests. 22 of those arrests were for warrants, either felony or misdemeanor warrants. The warrants were for identity theft, assault with a deadly weapon, narcotics, possession of a weapon. There are cases that need to be adjudicated in court, but people are absconding and they're not showing up. So we are taking physical arrests. So 22 of the 25 people were for warrants. The 3 individuals, or what I referred to Shannon on, were arrested for encroachment. Our goal is for people to accept shelter. We want them to accept shelter. We want them to accept the storage. And that's why every single contact we make, no matter where you are in the progressive enforcement, we're asking do you want to shelter? Do you want services? I've got hot teams out there that can facilitate shelter placement. I'm glad that we got 4 people into shelter, quite honestly. It's a success. The more I get, the happier I am. And back to your other question, Artie, the end game, we're never gonna give up. We're always gonna ask, always gonna ask.
Captain, real quick, would you say your hands are less tied? Because we've heard from officers on the street, my hands are tied, I can't really do much, but now we have more shelter beds, we have the bail reinstituted. I mean, would you say it's getting easier now for your officers? And then there's not enough officers in the department, so this is a massive issue. I mean, where are we at with?
It's a huge issue.
Right.
I wouldn't say it's easier. I would say that under the mayor's leadership, Chief Neslight, I've been given everything I need to make San Diego safe. It means offer shelter, offer shelter. It means holding people accountable for the laws that they violate. It's holding people accountable. If it means placing people under arrest because they've got outstanding warrants, that's what I'm gonna do. So I wouldn't say it's easier, but we've got a lot of work to do. It's a tremendous amount of work, and we're not gonna give up. Back to what I just said, we're not gonna give up. We can't give up.
How have changes in jail booking policies and the 0 bail change, how has that changed what folks are seeing in terms of enforcement now?
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer that question, Lisa. 0 bail, obviously the Sheriff's Department released that press release saying that 0 bail's changed. However, that wasn't a free-for-all, right? We didn't just automatically go back to pre-pandemic stages. So the Sheriff's Department still has internal policies and procedures that we're navigating to. At the end of the day, it doesn't change what we do as the San Diego Police Department. We still, if we get for progressive enforcement, for encroachment, if we get to that 4th step, we're taking physical custody of them and we're booking them into jail. So I'll have to leave that up to the Sheriff's Department to answer that question.
Okay. I'd also just like to point out that in the point in time count, which is an undercount, there were 2,494 people that were counted unsheltered in the city of San Diego. We don't have that many shelter beds, and I'm constantly hearing about how, sometimes there are people who want shelter beds and there's not one available. Also, as a result of the recent enforcement, I've been hearing about outreach workers being concerned that they're not able to find the folks that they're trying to help, and there's been disturbances there. How would you respond to that? Because I think that there is this feeling sometimes that there's a lot of shelter, and sometimes there are people who want it, they can't get it. Meanwhile, it can create problems when it comes to serving people. And I also hear from individuals, I'm out there a lot, and I hear from folks that are on a housing list, and that's what they're counting on. And so they're saying, no, I'm talking to somebody, I'm not gonna accept the shelter today. How would you respond to all of that?
I might ask our Director of Homeless Services.
Absolutely. I think you said it in your question. You said not today. right? So it may not be today, but it may be an hour later. It might be 3 hours later. It might be tomorrow. We know that the direction has been clear. We are compassionate based and we're moving forward to make sure that it's not just any shelter beds, Lisa. You've seen it, the growth. It's now, there's gonna be women's shelter beds. There's seniors that just came in on and prioritized last week. We're growing, and now with the county collaboration, we're making sure that we're also focused on people who need that support for mental health and substance abuse. So I think you answered it in your question, in that we're gonna continue trying, and if it's not today, they'll accept tomorrow. And to the outreach workers, they constantly connect and they work so hard, and they've said, Hafsa, you know, I'm so happy this person just accepted shelter. About 2 weeks ago, they didn't. So we see those stories coming in, hence the 70-year-old veteran. Thank you.
But as a follow-up to that, though, I mean, in general, in the homeless services world, and, you know, including former top officials and actually even the mayor himself, when you were campaigning, you said criminalization of homelessness is not the solution. Meanwhile, you know, the city's going out and it's basically saying, you know, you're offered a shelter bed or a ticket, right? So I guess I would just ask, I mean, kind of going back to the question that Artie was asking, you know, if it seems like this is not really moving more people into shelter, why do we continue to follow this model, and how would you defend it as the right one?
Well, I think that's education, right? I think that oftentimes people experiencing homelessness, when they do take that first step with the dedicated outreach workers, all of our providers know this. You know, there's social workers out there doing the difficult work, and sometimes it's establishing that rapport. They're out there constantly. And to your question, you saw the 4 that now recently accepted shelter, right? And so it's a new experience, and with the support of our providers, they're able to stay and then potentially get into permanent housing. So it's that education to people experiencing homelessness that, you know what, it's not safe right now. You could get infectious diseases, you could get all of these public health and safety risks, but when you come into a safe, warm place with meals and people who care about you and try to get you connected to services, that works.
Can you provide an update on the discussion about safe lots? Because there are a lot of people that legitimately have PTSD and other mental health conditions that make it very scary for them to go into a large shelter. That's very stressful. So what is the update on providing solutions for people that aren't interested in a congregate shelter for very real reasons?
Sure. So Hafsa and her department continue to make work on expanding our shelter options. The Palm Avenue shelter that we've brought back online is a non-congregate option that is available today. We have additional options that we're working on now. Hafsa's working on contracts and pulling together the funding. We're putting everything we got at this. And so I understand non-congregate is a request from the community, just as gender-based or allowing pets and these things. We're listening, we're all ears and acting. We have proof, tangible proof, this day, right now, that this stuff exists. We got more coming. Endgame, Marty, we're not finished with this yet. We're doing more. But there has to be a balance. And so compassion is having citywide street outreach, right? Wasn't here in 2020, it's here in 2021, and we're continuing to fund it. Compassion is growing our shelter options by hundreds of beds with more on the way. Compassion is building more permanent supportive housing that rents at levels that folks can afford, along with the services that will keep them housed. That's what we're doing. But I ask you, Lisa, compassionate for whom? Compassionate for the children of Barrio Logan that are having to walk in the middle of the street to go to school? Compassionate for the small business owner who's losing in customers and employees because they're surrounded by encampments? Compassionate for Renee's workers and environmental services who are out there picking up hazardous materials? Oh, that was what they signed up for, but that's what we're asking them to do, and they're doing their job. And what we're asking these individuals, when sometimes, yes, they're cited, is to move their materials for a while. Because this city, this mayor, has not forgotten what happened when we turned a blind eye to encampments and 20 people died of something for which we have a vaccine. Ignoring this issue is a path to death for these folks. That will not happen on my watch. I will do everything I can. We won't be 100% successful. People will continue to overdose, they'll continue to do other bad decisions, but it won't be because this city didn't do everything that we have to help get these folks off the streets. And our ask is simple. Please come off the streets. You asked about congregate versus non-congregate. We have that option. You have a pet, I got a place for you. there are options that are available. I'm asking people to avail themselves of it. Jamie.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to ask, what is the metric that you're using that would say that we're being successful? And what's the metric that we could look at to say, look, this is backsliding, maybe we need a new strategy?
That's a great question. We do look at a lot of data. Hafsa, I think you're probably best suited to answer that.
Absolutely. Well, we know that just last week, in a matter of 10 days, the non-congregate in Palm helped metrics of data. A person is now permanently housed. We know that 20 people in a matter of 1 week got into non-congregate shelter that otherwise would not have. So not only do we have that narrative, but we're looking at our numbers. As the mayor said, 25% increase in shelter beds, 93% occupancy. Those numbers don't lie, and we're going to continue to increase. I'd be interested to see how we can get Brandy into the women's shelter as soon as possible. Once that up, or she could, as Captain Takuti said, let's get her into one of the ones that we have now. So we know that there's been a record amount of people who are not only connected into shelter through outreach, but also into permanent housing. I believe our number now stands for over fiscal year almost over 400 to 500 folks. Thank you.
We're also seeing more people who live in vehicles all over the city, but particularly in beach communities. And actually, that is often a place where people first fall into homelessness too. I think a lot of us in this room know that. What is the city doing to try to provide more places for those people to safely park, especially in beach communities, because that is where these folks tend to go because there are amenities like bathrooms that they can use. So that's why they're there. And sometimes they're even telling me, the police actually told me to park in this area. So what are we doing to help those folks on an increased level who are living in their vehicles?
I'll try and answer that, and I think Councilmember Whitmer may have had a follow-up to the last thing, and I want to make sure you hear his voice since he's been doing so much of this work. On folks who are vehicle habitating, I would point out that we currently have multiple safe parking lots available to those individuals. You mentioned the presence of bathrooms in our coastal parking lots. There are bathrooms at those safe parking lots, along with services, social workers, the kinds of stuff that addresses the root cause of their homelessness. There's the opportunity and potential of getting connected to housing. And so I think it's a far preferable choice than congregating in some of these other areas. What we're doing is working with our providers. Hafsa is doing this work to see if we can expand the hours of operation. I'd like to see our lots be able to be open all day. I know that's currently a challenge that we experience where they shut down during during business hours, 6 a.m.
to 7 a.m., 6 a.m., 6 p.m. to 7, 6 a.m.
So we need to address that. Lisa, that costs money. Try to find that money. And we want to have more options. I will give council members credit. All of them have indicated a willingness to host some of these in their districts, and so we'll continue to explore some of that. But again, this goes back to, if we're providing all of these options, I'm hopeful that folks will avail themselves of it, and we have to have some ability to balance that. But the answer is we currently have options today. We're trying to improve the options that we have, and we'll continue to report out what that is. Again, this is utilizing limited taxpayer dollars. Councilmember Bernie may have something to follow up.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to be clear that from my perspective, what hasn't worked and what we see out there today is the result of years of inaction and years of ineffective action by previous administrations. This administration, and this city council have come in, and we are changing the status quo. You have seen a great increase in the number of shelters, the number of outreach visits, the affordable housing. This council has approved every unit of affordable housing that has come before it. We have dramatically increased outreach for mental health services in collaboration with the county. All of that is important groundwork that creates the environment for us to be able to tell somebody who is living on the sidewalk that we now have the resources, the services, and a place for you to go. That is what we have led up to. We are changing the status quo. And now that we have that ability to do that, we need to free the sidewalks of the encampments and make them available to everybody for their intended purpose. So it's not a question of what hasn't worked has been what was done in the past. What we're seeing today is what is going to work going forward.
One more, I have to ask one more question, and following up on the safe lots question, and I think you mentioned the downtown partnership looking into this. Will there be any consideration to a safe village?
Yeah.
Because because we talk about metrics, 1,200 calls or, entries to get it done.
Yeah.
Those are telling metrics right there.
Right.
It's the visual part of it that, you can't walk out your front door without running into this. So would you consider creating a safe village to get them off the sidewalks as you continue the work that you're doing?
Oh, that's a great way to clean up, because I don't think I answered your question sufficiently, James. I'll get back to that, and I did overlook that part, so thank you.
Sorry.
So, no, you're keeping me honest, and that's great. So here's the thing. On safe villages, we have put aside money in this proposed budget to do that. We had the call from the Downtown San Diego Partnership that Councilmember Whitburn mentioned before. I revised in May the budget to include a sizable allocation for city partnership in Safe Village. We're working with the Downtown Partnership and other philanthropic partners to try and cite and fully fund that particular effort. It's an option that's on the table, and the city is putting money where its mouth is. We're asking other folks to join us in this regard. Pitch in, help. It's not sufficient to just have geographic space set aside with some tents. We want to be better than that. That's status quo, as the council members mentioning. What we want to have are the wraparound services to make this more meaningful and to metrics get folks off the street. So that's in the proposed budget. As I mentioned in my closing, June 13th, we have, 13th, okay, never mind. June 13th, vote at the council. If they vote it as is, it'll be in there. And then you'll rightly ask that question to other folks. Are you participating in this effort? Are you going to match those dollars? Do you have a location to offer? The city heard the request. We're responding to it. It's in the budget. Jamie, to your question, it's hard, right? Already mentions the Get It Done apps. I'll point out 1,200 complaints. Some of those could be duplicative, but the point is, trend line is up, right? And it's hard to clear all those, whether or not those are duplicates. Again, we can get you some more of that data, but it is a metric point that hopefully I would like to see few of. But people are right, and we ask them to report what they see, and they are doing that. In part because they're frustrated, but also because they're there. I think the most important metric are exits to housing. We're always going to have homeless folks, right? That will always be. It's always been our nation's history. It's always going to be the case that folks will get a run of bad luck, fall down, take up a drug habit or a mental illness. The question is, how long are they going to be on the street? And those who avail themselves of the services, can they exit to what we know ends homelessness, which is housing? As Hafsa mentioned, and as I mentioned in my comments, this expansion in shelter capacity, so more beds than we had a year ago, with 93% occupancy, right? Those barriers that we're removing to allow more people to actually use them. That's a good metric. I think that's one, but I'm not satisfied with that one because the shelter is not permanent housing, right? But that's how you get to permanent housing, right? So this is, again, the insistence on folks hopefully accepting the shelter bed, because the shelter is not the end point, it's the medium point to housing. How are we to get this person housing ready? Any of you a landlord? Are you going to credit check these folks? Are you going to work with them to pay their rent? Are you going to sign a rental agreement to them? This is where we can do some of that work. So it's the exit to housing, hopefully increasing the number of people who get off the streets, while simultaneously, hopefully limiting the number of people who fall on the streets. And that's one thing that we haven't talked about today that I think is worthy of elevating. Just on Friday, our City Housing Commission released new numbers where we've appropriated over $200 million in rental relief courtesy of the federal and state government. 17,000 San Diego families, households, not people, households who have prevented from becoming homeless because we helped them to extinguish their rental debt due to the pandemic. Now, I don't expect you to write a lot of stories about 17,000 families who didn't become homeless, but that's what we're talking about. So preventing the inflow in, trying to get more people out, but certainly it's about having fewer people on our streets. This shouldn't be controversial. I have yet to have a San Diego, no matter where you are on the spectrum of this issue, that thinks it's acceptable to have people living on the streets, that want to facilitate people's continued demise on our sidewalks, with all that comes both to that individual and to everyone around them. And San Diegans have been compassionate with their dollars. We are going to appropriate nearly $150 million between the city's general fund and the Housing Commission to this issue. And we haven't even talked that much about what the county is doing. And they're doing more than ever. Thank you to the County Board of Supervisors. When we level this kind of investment, we expect results. And hopefully the results are more exits to housing, fewer get it done complaints, and a lot more people who are not calling the sidewalk a street, their home in the city of San Diego. I thank you all for being here today. We're happy to get you that data about Get It Done. I imagine some of you are interested in that. And I appreciate all the folks who are here today. This is a part of a team that's comprehensively addressing this important issue. Thank you all very much.